Welcome and thank you for joining the Actites and Capita webinar on regulation-driven IT change programs, how to satisfy all the stakeholders. Before we start, a few logistical details. To avoid any sound issues, you're all on mute. If for any reason you're not, please select the option on your phone. Also, for privacy purposes, all attendees' names are hidden and you will not be able to see anyone else but you. For questions, you'll be able to ask them at the end during our Q&A via the chat box on your screen. During this session, we will share real-life client examples showing how applying a range of straightforward, proven techniques can ensure programs get back on track and stay there. We'll also describe how to use these techniques to provide evidence that the regulator's requirements have been met. Please welcome Tom Norris.
Well, good afternoon, and thank you very much, Hannah. So today we're going to be briefly running through a series of items. First of all, we'd like to explore what's different about this type of program. So what are the differences for regulatory change programs? I'd like to talk about the goals for regulatory projects, the choices which we have: the low-fat, the semi-skim, the full-fat models, and a series of conclusions which we can draw. And this is all about us proceeding through our projects quickly and efficiently as we go. So the first thing is worth saying is that the penalties for not finishing regulatory work can be severe. We can look at that in the first case, say in the banking sector, and you can see here there's a series of regulatory fines placed by the UK regulator predominantly, where people have failed to meet their commitments, and they've been fined serious and substantial amounts of money. And maybe 20 years ago, actually being fined by the regulator would prevent customers coming to you. They'd think, I'll go somewhere more secure. But now so many people have been fined by the regulators that actually, you might say, from a reputation perspective, it matters less. But of course, it's still a big cost. So serious penalties if you get things wrong. So the first thing that we'd like to explore is, well, what's different about this sort of program? And the first point to make really clear is most of these projects are all about data. They're about you're providing the data to the regulator or to other people, or separating data from one part of the business to another. And very often it's data which may not exist or exist in a completely different place. So say with a MiFID requirement, there's a need that you have to submit the traders' passport numbers or national insurance numbers or whatever. Probably only at the moment exist on an HR system. So the projects are different from our traditional ones. They have fixed deadlines, pretty obvious. Fixed deadlines with a threat of fines, penalties, and audits if you don't make it along the way. It's also important to understand that unlike our traditional program, there tends to be a lack of clarity with what the regulations mean and to whom they apply. And particularly for regulations which apply to a wide range of industries, say in the banking sector, the pharmaceutical sectors, transport maybe. The regulations are written in a way whereby they're quite generic, and they have to be interpreted in some way for our business. But there's this lack of clarity where they're written for a range of different contexts in different locations. And lastly, the big difference is there are different types of sponsorship. There isn't a business person driving to make the IT change. There's probably a compliance person saying you have to make these things to proceed. So the process of external reporting of status and progress may be completely new to some program managers or some projects, and you may be reporting to a new set of stakeholders. And lastly, there's the conflict which many programs see between business as usual and business change. And in this case, it's business as usual, business change, and the forced regulatory change set upon us. So these programs are different. There is the similarity, which is always important to remember, of the mixed human and IT characteristics, which we see it in many programs. So having thought about what's different, we can think about, well, what are our goals for our projects? And quite clearly, the goal of a regulatory change program is to demonstrate confidence in the compliance solution which satisfies the regulator not only at the end of the program, but actually during the program and after the program is finished, so that we can continually satisfy the regulator as we're going. And of course, to manage the internal and the external stakeholders along the way. So two key important goals. The last thing which is worth saying is it's also our goal to generate wider value for the engineering efforts and the investment we're making, and getting that wider value is often not considered, but provides us with real extra benefits. So those are our goals, and when we look at our regulatory programs, one of the things we can say is, well, where do the problems come from? And these are industry standard data points from other software development programs as opposed to regulatory-driven ones. But we know that on most IT change programs, about 32% of the defects during the development lifecycle are caused by the requirements. And then another 29% are caused by defects caused by the design. So someone gets the requirement wrong, and that's a problem later on, or someone gets the requirement right and then they design it wrong, and that also causes its problems downstream. And for regulated change, our interpretations often vary with other organizations who are making the same changes. So the error rate in these circumstances is most definitely higher. And this, in my view, is one of the biggest areas which cause delays and overruns for large regulatory change programs. So when we look at this, we can say, well, what should we be doing here? And at this point, we should introduce our kind of low-fat method to dealing with these items. And the first and most important thing to do is to identify the minimum set of changes that we can make for the program to meet the regulator's requirements based on our existing infrastructure and our organization. And very often we see large change programs where the compliance guys have turned up with a book of instructions, and then they've handed them to the IT guys who implement the whole lot blindly, irrespective of their applicability. Again, more cost, more overrun. So the first thing, identify the minimum set. Number two, define these really precisely, looking particularly at the events, the transactions, and the data needed to fulfill those. And then lastly, we want to use those definitions to agree what's needed in a business language, not in just grinding technical detail, and clarify those, because we know from the left-hand side of this slide, we know that many of the problems come from misunderstandings and poor design. So we want to clarify those really carefully, and as we do that, we can start to engage our development teams or our suppliers in different ways. And oh, so often on the programs we've seen our customers subcontract the development of a regulatory change, but the requirements have been terribly vague, and what we've ended up with is people doing gold plating in some areas and leaving other important things out, or implementing some small part, but not all of it, because there's some snag in the description.
Isn't it the case, this is Ajay, isn't it the case that requirements are always rather vague?
Ajay, of course, you're absolutely right. Requirements are often vague, and as we see on the left-hand side, it's the cause. It is the cause of our problems. But if we want to proceed and satisfy the regulatory change carefully, we have to address it. So you say, isn't it the case? Yes. It's like if you have a stone in your shoe, do you want to take it out and make good progress or not? And our view is, because we know it's the case, you should address it. Most programs we see in this domain don't spend enough time making sure the requirements are clear enough. So is that the satisfactory answer for you, Ajay? So it's a good point there. So what do we say? Say, how do we identify the minimum set of changes? And here we have a risk grid, which we use regularly because we find it a good formula. And we say, for the changes we've got, what's the impact on the business? This is the bottom axis here. What's the impact if this were to fail? And the best people to do that are the business people, and when you go and engage with those people, you'll find that actually there will be changes which make no difference to our organization. You know, there'll be transactions we never use, so there's no point in writing code to report them or to engage in those. So for each of the requirements we identify, we want to say, does it interrupt our business? Is it going to cause us grief? Is it a visible problem, or is it minor? And then we want technical people to say how likely it is that things will change, the same way on the same axis here. So we want to engage in this. And I can see that Matt looks like he's got a question here.
Thanks, Tom. Surely everyone's going to put what they think is important in the top right. Everyone's going to want to be in the top right.
And Matt, you're right. It's a really common question that people do want to put things in the top right-hand corner. But if you really do engage with the business, and you get true stakeholders engaged, they will realize that actually not everything does interrupt their business. And when they engage in these workshops, they realize that not everything's an interruption, and they'll start to spread things evenly from left to right. And the same with the technical people. They say, oh, actually, we've done this dozens of times before. It's sure to work. So our experience is if you facilitate these well, you'll get a good spread across the run here. So once we've done those, we should say, well, how do we further define these items? And it's our suggestion that people take on board stories and scenario conditions. You write the items in a clear, concise way. So all the stories start in the form as a and some stakeholder who really wants this story. And again, we see people working on things where there's no beneficial owner, and probably it's not worth doing. And then you say, I want, and this is the thing that they want. So in this case, the compliance director, I want the scope of instruments which are reported to the regulator to increase the depth of information provided. So you can see there's a clear thing. And then there's a so that's the real benefit. So we're not writing we're not coding and preparing items which have no real benefits to the organization. So first of all, a story, and then for each story, assuming that you're going to develop them, you'll write a scenario condition in the form of given some precondition, when some event occurs, then a particular result takes place. So you can see here, given there's a trade event record, when the fields are examined, then the trader within the firm's national insurance number or passport number will be present. So we would encourage people to write these because they're really clear and they're really easy to debug, and they address Ajay's problem of, well, hasn't this always been a problem? The answer is yes. This is a really good way of dealing with it.
So, hi Tom, it's Matt again. So how hard is it actually to write these stories and scenarios? Because they look quite simple, to be honest.
And the lovely thing about them is that the format really is very straightforward. Actually, writing the detail down is a little bit tricky. And you have to know the subject you're writing about. And our experience is that the first ones are very hard for people, and they spend time getting familiar with this. But over time, the clarity of what they're writing, the mistakes they make as they write them and they get them reviewed, that's really improved. So over time, if you're trained well, writing these stories and scenarios, though not easy, because of course it's got lots of grinding detail in here, is straightforward and reliable. And of course, what should we do with our stories and scenarios? We should link those back to our requirements. And you can see here's one for MiFID II, which describes the ID and the passport number. And you can see, well, this requirement allows a whole array of other choices which you could implement, but in this particular case, the person implementing this has decided just to go for ID number or passport number in a straightforward way. And there's a clear link from the story and the scenario back through to the requirement. And you can see here quite clearly they're not doing the date of birth in year, month, day format followed by the characters of the first name and the last name, because that's considered not necessary for this position. So the last thing about the low fat model is informative reporting. That actually we want clear, informative reporting linked back to stories and scenarios, not driven by numbers of tests or by counting things, and again demonstrating the link back to the risk. And if you look in the top right-hand corner here, you can see a large number of scenarios have been written and tested, and coded and tested, and some are green and they passed and they're working well, some are red and they're not working so well. And in a moment, a senior executive can look at this and think, this is how well we're doing. And that's the key point here.
Tom, how do we interpret that? I mean, it's obvious to you, but how do we interpret that? Is that good or bad?
Well, it's an interesting thing. In this particular case, you can see that people have spent a lot of time working in the top right-hand corner. But if you look in the middle, someone's also run and prepared and tested a large number of scenarios for the quite likely visible category of stories and scenarios. And probably the business would be saying when they see this, can you concentrate more in the top right-hand corner? So it's not that this is wrong, but it might be better to spend more time working on the things where you think there are more failures. And if you look at the failure rate across the very likely to fail row, more things fail than across the middle. So stepping quickly through, this is the low-fat model. Write your stories and scenarios from the original requirements, obviously review them, and then monitor progress clearly and concisely in a visible way across it. So we could then say, well, what would a semi-skimmed model be? And that would be one where we took these stories and these scenarios and said, well, how can we automate this? And we know, the one thing we really know is that data is really well suited to preparing automated tests. So we have a framework which takes a delivery assurance framework, which takes these stories and these scenarios and the example bits of data from beneath them and uses them to drive tests along the way. So you can see at the top here, we've done our risk assessments, the stories and scenarios, that's our low-fat piece. And now here in the middle, we're moving across to some story execution scheme where we can run these tests automatically and repeatedly to show us where we're going. And in some cases, we might prepare the test even before the automated test, before everything works. And these aren't just tests, they aren't exclusively tests for components. Actually, we can prepare end-to-end tests in the way. So what are the advantages here? On the bottom left-hand side, you can see clearly we're saying the advantages, this is linked back to the scenarios the business wanted in the first place. It increases the depth of testing and the coverage. It dramatically changes the speed of execution, much faster, much more reliable, and it provides us with that end-to-end capability. So we're not just testing one change in the middle of our many related systems.
So Tom, this framework, is it an overhead? How long does it take to set up and implement?
Well, of course, I would say it's an enabler, not an overhead, but you do have to set it up. And let's move on to the next slide at the same time, where you can start to see some of the technology which you can choose for your solution here. Our experience is we can set this framework up using tools which our customers may be using already. So HP's ALM or Quality Center or Jira or the Team Foundation server, and link them according to their chosen technical desire through the Java model or maybe the .NET model if you're a Microsoft shop. And we can do that in a small number of weeks. So typically we'd say definitely less than a month, but definitely more than a week. And it would depend a bit on your infrastructure. And just occasionally, it's a real irritant to us, of course, just occasionally, it takes longer to get access to the technology than it would take us to set this framework up. So the framework is easy and straightforward to set up. And as you can see here, there's a real setup for building this on different types of technology. And it's reusable in lots of different spaces. So one of our customers set it up in one domain, and then they thought, oh, we've got another project here. We'll just reuse the same framework, the same structure, the same repository for the stories, the same reporting format, and instantly they get a great leg up to preparing their next piece. And then, of course, you need to glue that structure into the framework. So here you can see the delivery assurance automation framework. The dots on the left-hand side show where test fixtures are added so that you might insert data. And here we can do an end-to-end test where we're putting data into several different systems. and then they're going through various other systems, and then we can collect the data as it's being reported to the regulator. So with one of our customers who had dozens of trading systems, we automated trades being put into lots of different places, and then 4 systems away around a whole stack of technology, we checked that those same trades were ready in the right format for being reported to the regulator, and we checked that others weren't being reported to the regulator, which of course should not be reported to particular regulators. So along the way here, you can see that in the middle here, there's the automation interaction. There's our framework in purple, and then along the right-hand side, there's our approach for producing the reports. And I see that leads to the question here.
So Tom, does it have to fit into a traditional development method, or can it fit with other types of methods?
Well, it's very interesting. So here, it absolutely will fit in different ranges. Here, we're applying it to a traditional model where you're making some changes for the regulator. What we describe this as kind of continuous ready. So if you were to move to a more agile model or a more DevOps model, you're in a position where you could run these tests lots of times every day or run these tests every night as you wanted. So it's a first step in moving in towards the more continuous approach to making releases. So this to us concludes the approach of writing of a semi-skim model. There is of course the last approach, which is a kind of full fat approach, which is where you kind of waddle your way to the end, doing absolutely everything in sight. And again, we see this more and more. We see people write hundreds of requirements based on interpretation of the regulatory rules. And sometimes they give them Spire and they go away and code them and come back months later with them all wrong. So there's a big exercise for requirement writing, and they design the solutions. And sometimes I talk about this as if it's salami. You know, you might, rather than having thin slices of salami, this is like taking great bites out of the sausage, and it's really quite unpalatable in some ways. And then you implement the design, you test the components, and you write a small number of end-to-end tests right at the very end, and then you discover probably you misunderstood the requirement in the first place. And along the way, you haven't got evidence for the regulator that you are making steady progress towards their chosen date. And you'll find the problems, you'll fix them, you'll test again, you'll repeat as required, and then at the very end you'll say, oh, I've got all these incomprehensible test results, and I'll pretend that that's enough for me to get acceptance. So we think this is a kind of slow and dated model, but it is possible to do it, but it's a long way from ideal, and it requires huge labor efforts. So when we look at the choices of using the leaner models in terms of the semi-skimmed or the skim milk approach, we see people going live faster. We see people in the top left-hand corner spending less money on testing efforts because they've got things right early on. They've got things in a good. We see the number of in-life faults introduced by the change, you know, down by more than half. A really exciting thing. We see the costs of defects and the tests needed all falling. So we're making a real change into that domain here. And most important, the bit at the bottom is releases are a long time. They're faster, they're cheaper, and they have fewer defects when they go live. So if I conclude, our proposition for this is don't go down the full fat route. Focus on stories and scenarios to sort out the requirements, debug the regulatory requirements, ask them questions, to give real clarity to the implementers. Take a risk-based reporting approach to show what's going on rather than presenting reams of incomprehensible data. Automate with the planned architecture, so there's clear visibility from the stories I had in the first place through to the tests and the results. And this will help you find defects earlier, it'll support frequent integration, and it'll provide lasting reuse for subsequent programs. And the last thing to do is, of course, is build this around the processes and controls so you can accelerate more projects, and you can keep focus on the items which are important on the top right-hand corner of the grid, rather than those which are less important. And doing this will deliver evidence which demonstrates confidence in a compliance solution. So this delivers the evidence to demonstrate confidence in the compliance solution. So,
thank you, Tom. So no more full fat food for us then, concentrate on stories and scenarios of automation. We do have a question from Damien. Don't let the rules, laws, regulations dictate the requirements.
I think they're not that clear. So of course the rules quite clearly say this is what we want. But I think very often they leave lots of choices for different industries. I don't know what industry you work in, Damon, but they give lots of choices where you can implement it one way or another. You can do all of what they've asked for, or just the bit which is pertinent to your business, which is actually what the regulator wants you to do. They don't want you to spend tens of millions of pounds doing things which don't matter to them. They have a particular view of the data they'd like you to share, and that of course will be the case. So of course that they provide pointers, but I think it's important that we don't get caught up into I must do everything even though it doesn't apply to me.
That's great. So if anyone else has any more questions, please do send them to us now, or please do contact Tom or Lee. The details are on screen if you have any future questions.